This video is a deep dive into testing the gauges and warning lights of our center instrument cluster. Let's look at some of the differences in the center instrument panel. This is the panel where there's the clock, stereo, here would be heater controls, and down here is a little coin tray. So this one here is 74 and prior. It's got clock, temp, amperage, fuel meter, brake light. Somewhere in the middle of 1975, they switched things up. They removed the amperage gauge. You've got a generator light, a coolant level light, and the brake light is right here. I'm inclined to use the 75 on panel. My 74, it's got a brake here. That could be fixed. There's also a brake in one of the screw attachment points. Those could be fixed, but I'm just going to clean this one up here and get that ready to go. I'm also going to test everything. Now there's differences on the rear too. Let's look at that. Let's compare the two here. So on the 74 and prior, you've got a round plug here, which is where all the sensors are coming from. You've got 1, 2, 3 of the bulbs that are 194 bulbs. Those are going to illuminate each gauge. You've also got a 1, 2, 3 blade connector here. It's really power and ground. The clock has a 3 blade, very small blades connector. And then when we take a look at the 75 on, somewhere in the middle of 75, they switched it up. You've got a 4 blade connector for the clock. There's our round connector for the incoming sensors and instrumentation measuring devices. Incoming is a 5 blade connector, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus this little side ground here. There's only one 194 bulb, and then there's 1, 2, 3 74 bulbs, and those are going to light up the generator, low coolant level, and brake light. So with a missing socket, went ahead and got some more. Come in a little 10-pack, pretty inexpensive. But here's the thing. They're different today. Let's talk about that. This notch right here is what clips this socket into the printed circuit board. Today's sockets have a thinner notch because today's circuit boards are thinner. So back in the 70s, these printed circuit boards were a millimeter, maybe even 2, thicker than they are today. Now I have to do a little bit of a modification, and these will work. Should be enough. Let's give it a go. It'll work. I'm probably going to do like a couple of these just so I have spares. Just added another millimeter to the space of that notch. Now let's test the bulbs. Make sure they all work. So the factory manual here to check the light bulb here, the 194 bulb. I need A, go into the fuse box, and C, illumination light. I've got power coming in to the bulb and ground coming out of the bulb. I'm going to hold this up so hopefully the camera can pick it up. Okay, so the 194 bulb works. Excellent. Alright, let's check this. That is the brake light. So coming from the fuse box, that's number 2. It's this guy. Brake warning light is 4. It's this guy. Brake light works. Incidentally, that is the slot that I just put the modified socket in. It's working. The next one is the coolant level warning light, so that'll be number 5. So it's at number 4. Hop on over to number 5. is the low coolant light. It's actually a sensor inside my coolant tank, and that's how that's going to get triggered. Coolant level. Next up is the generator light. That's going to be this terminal here. So you can just easily trace that. So coolant is coming on at the same time as gen, probably because that's when you turn the key. It powers everything up. Shows you that it's boot up. Now let's test the coolant temperature. To do temp, I need number 3. Here's number 3. And I need earth. Dash panel earth is number 6. In reality, this temperature gauge works. It's going to work on a resistor type thing. Whoa! Okay. Well, we know the needle moves. That's key. Okay, I dug up the spare fuel sending unit so that we have a resistor to test the fuel gauge. So coming from the battery, we put the fuse box line. This goes power to the fuse box. So there's our red. Next is going to be ground. Dash panel earth is number 6. Dash panel earth. Now we need to ground the sending unit. So let's ground the sending unit. So there's that. We need to tell the gauge what the sending unit is doing. So here's our resistor plugging into number 1 here. And there. Let's flip it. Everything's got to stay. I don't want anything going. So at the very bottom, it seems to start out at a quarter tank. And then as oh, there we go. Seems to be a dead spot on this sending unit. Fuel gauge works. It's a little sketchy down here on the empty. It might be just the sending unit, but I'm going to say this gauge works. Let's talk about the clock. I tested the clock and it doesn't work. So I tested the clock out of the green car and that one doesn't work either. I decided to take it apart, see if there's anything obvious that's going on in there, maybe causing a jam. And one of the things that I noticed right away is that clock repair is beyond my skill set. I was referred to the guy that does the instruments for Jay Leno's Garage. That's Redline in Santa Clarita, California. So after talking with them, he recommended a quartz conversion. He recommended me to a guy called Instrument Services, Inc. in Illinois. They've got a website called clocksandgauges.com. But as it turns out, their quartz conversion is too big for this Mazda clock. The Mazda clock is a Jayco, and the dimensions are such that the quartz conversion from these guys won't fit. So I had to keep looking around. What I found was D&M Restoration in Greenville, South Carolina. So I sent it off to those guys. I've got it back here. Let's take a look. Buffed it clean. It's looking good. All right, let's bench test the new incoming clock here. Got the power is the blue with red stripe, and right next to it is the ground. I gotta be real careful that these don't frick yes. A working clock rebuilt by DM Restoration, Greensville, South Carolina. Right off the bat, I'm noticing that there was a wire, a ground wire that went here, and that attached to the movement that was anchored with these 3 holes here. Well, let's just make sure the light works, because that's what that ground was for. This black ground is for the movement, and this other ground, which was this red with blue striped wire, that was a ground for the light. Let's just make sure that works. So the light works, but it's really tough to see at the clock face, and yeah, I'm wondering what's going on there. So I'm gonna go ahead and glue this here. Got some Gorilla Glue. I used to use Mr. Glue, great stuff. Used it on plastic, rubber. I mean, I used up all that I had bought. When I needed more, the guy had retired, so I'm like, what the heck? So I bought Gorilla Glue. Then I get an email from the guy, hey, I'm back in business. Apparently retirement was difficult. I'll give that a solid hold. Those of you who've been watching this show for a while know I'm about to use BlackWow on these plastic pieces. Put the clock back in the instrument panel. So things are slightly different now. So before there were studs that held these in with screws, and now I've rounded up a couple of sheet metal screws. Of course, this centerpiece is a nut with a lock washer. Gonna snug that for now. So here's those screws with a couple of washers. I wanted these new screws to be short because there's clock movement inside there. So let's begin reassembling this. Starting with a new lens here for the diffusion of the light. Just kind of slips into this wedge here. Holds it nice and tight. And then in goes the instrument cluster.